I didn't move to the ranch for community. I moved to get away from it. 40 acres of wild oak, rolling hills and red dirt, nestled beyond the edge of Copper Valley's suburban sprawl. The property had once belonged to the Wilkes family, passed through 3 generations before finally hitting the market. I bought it in cash, sight unseen. After 20 years behind a screen running cybersecurity operations for corporations that would sell their own employees for a quarterly gain, I was done with people. I wanted open sky. I wanted silence. I wanted space where no one told me what color to paint my barn or when to mow my lawn, which is why I nearly spit out my coffee when she showed up. A pristine white Lexus rolled up the gravel path like it had no business touching dirt. Out stepped a woman in wedge heels and a matching linen pantsuit, clutching a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. Her hair was styled in that unmistakable helmet blonde way suburban matriarchs favored, stiff, sharp, and aggressively, symmetrical. She didn't knock. She stood outside my workshop door and tapped on the glass with a manicured nail. I opened it halfway. "Morning," she chirped, eyes scanning the woodshop behind me like she was checking for violations. "I'm Karen Mathers, president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. We're your neighbors just up the hill." I leaned against the doorframe. I didn't know I had neighbors. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Technically, you're not in Willow Creek, but you do border the community. We like to maintain a certain aesthetic standard across the ridge." I raised an eyebrow. And, she continued, tilting her head, "your barn's color doesn't align with the approved palette. Also, we noticed you've got a livestock trailer visible from the street. Section 12D strongly discourages commercial or agricultural eyesores." Now I laughed once. Dry. "This isn't your jurisdiction. My deed is clean. No HOA attachments, no easements. You don't have a say." Karen didn't flinch. "We're simply encouraging harmony. When one property drops the standard, property values across the neighborhood can suffer. I'm sure you understand." I stepped forward until she had to tilt her head up to meet my gaze. "Lady," I said flatly, "this land is mine. Not shared, not visual extension. Mine. Your HOA rules end where my barbed wire starts." For a moment, I saw it. The flicker behind her eyes. Control slipping, ego bruising. Then she recovered. "We'll be keeping an eye on things," she said smoothly, turning back toward her Lexus. "Welcome to the neighborhood." The gravel groaned under her tires as she left, slower than necessary, letting her taillights flash red like a threat. I watched her go and felt the cold gut punch of something I thought I'd left behind. Politics, games, power plays disguised as manners. 2 days later, I got my first anonymous complaint letter. Printed, not handwritten, and slipped under my gate. It cited unsightly debris, animal odor, and unauthorized construction. The return address was, unsurprisingly, Willow Creek HOA. That was when I installed the cameras. By the end of the week, Karen returned, this time with a small entourage of clipboard-toting advisors. They didn't ask to enter. They stood just outside my gate, pointing, murmuring, and taking photos of my fence line. One of them even had a measuring tape. I could have confronted them, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I reviewed my deed, made a few quiet calls to the county clerk, and confirmed what I already knew. My property was untouchable. Legally immune, from Willow Creek's reach. But Karen didn't strike me as someone who needed legal standing. She thrived on social leverage, on intimidation, on the illusion of control. She was used to people folding, not fighting. She didn't know me. Still, I underestimated her next move. One morning, I drove back from town with feet in the truck bed to find a chalkboard sign staked at the edge of my property. It read, "Private. Event entrance, Willow Creek Retreat." This way, beneath it, in delicate hand lettering, "Yoga, brunch, wine by the creek." My stomach tightened. There were tire tracks in my field and laughter drifting from the trees. Karen hadn't just crossed the line, she'd erased it, and I was done playing nice. By the time I parked my truck and walked the ridge, the damage was done. Folding tables lined my south pasture, covered in white cloth and mason jars stuffed with lavender. A Bluetooth speaker balanced on a hay bale spilled acoustic guitar covers into the wind. Half a dozen women in matching yoga leggings posed like flamingos beneath the oak trees, while a server in a bow tie poured wine into glasses from a chilled bucket I didn't own. At the center of it all, holding court beside a rented arch of eucalyptus and fairy lights, stood Karen. She spotted me as I stepped over the low fence that separated my grazing field from the road. Her expression didn't change. She raised her glass like a toast. "Isn't it charming out here?" she called. "You really should consider hosting more events." I didn't answer. I scanned the group, about 20 people total. Cars had been parked haphazardly along my drive, including one that blocked access to the workshop. A portable toilet had been dragged onto the far corner of my property, its anchor ropes tied to my cattle gate. I clenched my jaw. "You know, this is trespassing," I said, stepping into the circle of mingling guests. Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she chirped. "It's not like we're damaging anything. Just a few friends enjoying the view. This is private land. My land." She gave a tight smile. "There's a public easement right at the edge of your property. Technically, we entered through the Greenbelt Trail. We only stepped over the boundary a little. No one's hurting anything. Besides," she leaned in with a conspiratorial wink, "a little goodwill goes a long way in these parts." I stared at her, but she was already turning back to her guests. That night, I didn't sleep. I checked my cameras. They had unplugged 2 of them, deliberately. They'd rerouted foot traffic through the north fence line where the coverage was thin. A coordinated invasion. I could have called the sheriff, but that would have meant playing it by her rules, paperwork, he said, more bureaucracy. No, Karen thrived on process. She assumed I'd drown in it like the others she pushed around, but she forgot I didn't come from her world. I didn't need permission. I had power, literal and figurative. The next morning, I got to work. First, the gate. I installed a new steel bar crossgate with a digital lock and reinforced hinges. The kind ranchers use when protecting livestock from predators or property from poachers. Then I buried steel spikes under the edge of the trail they'd been using, camouflaged by mulch. Nothing dangerous, just enough to flatten a few tires and send a message. And finally, I traced the power cable they had run from their little pop-up generator into my barn's external socket. They'd piggybacked off my supply without asking. I flipped the master switch, then rewired the exterior ports to a dummy circuit. 2 days later, she came back. Not to the door. She wasn't that bold anymore. But I caught her on the camera. Again, just outside the new gate, lips pursed, arms folded. Behind her were 3 SUVs packed with coolers, event gear, and folding chairs. Her retreat had returned, except now, the gate wouldn't open. She pressed the call button twice, then yanked at the chain. Nothing. She leaned in close to the keypad, trying to find a weakness. There wasn't one. She circled the perimeter, pacing, her frustration mounting. I watched from the workshop, sipping coffee. When one of her guests finally pulled out a phone, likely to call for help, I cut the main breaker. The entire ridge went dark. No sound. No lights. No signal. Just birds and wind and the sound of her heels crunching gravel. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, the retreat had retreated. I left the gate locked all night. The next morning, a letter appeared in my mailbox. Cease and desist. On HOA letterhead. It accused me of obstructing community access, violating shared property access laws, and damaging neighbor relations. It demanded I restore gate access within 48 hours or face legal consequences. I laughed, out loud, because what Karen didn't know, and what I was about to show her, is that I'd already filed a trespass complaint with the sheriff, and I wasn't the one facing consequences anymore. Karen wasn't the type to back down. 2 days after the cease and desist letter, I spotted her Lexus idling just beyond the gate, tinted windows shielding whoever sat inside. She didn't honk, didn't approach, just waited, like a lioness crouched, in tailored linen, expecting me to blink first. She'd underestimated me. Again. I let her stew. Inside, I printed the sheriff's trespass complaint, signed and time-stamped. I made 3 copies. One went to the HOA's legal office, one to the county enforcement department, and one I laminated and zip-tied directly to the front gate, beside the keypad. The next morning, the Lexus was gone. In its place, 2 uniformed officers from county, code enforcement. I met them halfway up the gravel drive, hands visible, posture calm. "Mr. Rourke?" one asked. "We've had a complaint about unauthorized fencing obstructing public access to the trail." I nodded and led them directly to the gate. "Here's the property line," I said, pointing to a clearly marked iron stake with GPS coordinates etched on the top. "And here's the easement, 10 feet short of my fence. Everything beyond this is mine." The second officer scanned the laminated complaint, then his GPS app. "You're well within your rights," he confirmed. "Did the HOA president sign this complaint?" I smirked. "Nope, just an anonymous tip." The 2 exchanged a look. They'd seen this before. Neighborhood power plays dressed up as legal actions. They took photos, logged the visit, and left without another word. Karen, however, wasn't done. 2 nights later, my security camera picked up movement again. This time at 2:43 a.m., headlights, quiet footsteps. A figure in athletic wear tiptoeing along the north fence line, dragging a ladder. I activated the floodlights. She froze like a raccoon caught in a dumpster raid. "Try anything," I called through the intercom, "and I'll have the sheriff review this footage by breakfast." She bolted. The ladder fell sideways into the brush. 3 hours later, I emailed the footage directly to the HOA board. No words, just the file. An hour after that, I got a reply, not from Karen, but from the HOA's legal liaison. "Thank you for sharing this. We were not aware of these actions, and will be addressing them internally." Translation: Karen had gone rogue, and they knew it. They just hadn't expected me to catch her in the act. Still, a part of me knew she wouldn't go quietly. Karen wasn't a rule follower. She was a rule maker. The kind who bent laws until they snapped, then claimed the pieces were yours. And so I prepared for the next round. I posted custom signs around the perimeter. Private ranch. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I reinforced the fencing with motion detectors and smart floodlights. Every inch of my property became a fortress, high-tech, legal, and airtight. But I didn't stop there. I filed a public nuisance claim, citing unauthorized entry, illegal event activity, and environmental disruption due to foot traffic and temporary structures on protected grasslands. I had video, timestamps, and witness statements from my farmhand, who'd seen guests lighting candles under a dry oak. The sheriff's office opened a case file. Karen was officially under investigation. 2 days later, HOA board members knocked. On my gate, without her, they brought coffee and sheepish grins. "Mr. Rourke," the tallest one said, extending a hand. "We wanted to apologize for the oversteps." I didn't shake it. "You let her weaponize your board," I said flatly. "You think coffee fixes that?" He looked down, abashed. "We've relieved Karen of her presidency, effective immediately. That got my attention. She's been suspended pending the outcome of the nuisance complaint. We've also reviewed your footage. Your property line is clear. We won't be contesting it." A long pause settled between us like dust. "We'd like to propose a boundary agreement," he added. "Formal paperwork. You keep your land. We stop bothering you." I stared at him, silent. Part of me wanted to refuse, just to twist the knife a little more. But another part, older, quieter, knew this was the kill shot. Clean, legal, public. I nodded. "Send the paperwork," I said. "And tell Karen if I so much as smell brunch, I'm suing for emotional distress." They left, but the war wasn't over yet. Not until I made sure Karen knew exactly who she'd tangled with, and what it cost her. Karen's fall wasn't loud. It was quiet. The kind of slow, humiliating descent that leaves bruises not just on reputation, but on ego. A week after the HOA officially stripped her of the presidency, I heard she'd been removed from 3 neighborhood committees, including beautification and events. Someone leaked the sheriff's investigation footage to the neighborhood Facebook group. The comment section turned into a bonfire. The Golden Queen of Cross Ridge Ranch Estates had become its cautionary tale. But that wasn't the end. Not for me. Because while the HOA backed off and Karen disappeared from neighborhood business, she hadn't apologized. She hadn't acknowledged the lies, the trespassing, the months of manipulation. That silence was her final insult. So I reminded her the county sent out a scheduled surveyor to finalize the boundary agreement. I stood with him as he marked the line in fluorescent orange paint. Every inch of that neon spray was a victory. At the end of the path, just beyond the rise where Karen's property line met mine, I erected a new sign, oversized, laminated, lit with solar uplighting at night. Private property. No HOA access, no exceptions. Violators prosecuted to full extent of law, and under that, in bold block font, trespassers will be charged event fees, in advance. It was petty. It was pointed. And it was perfectly legal. The very next day, a Mercedes SUV pulled up outside the gate. Karen, alone this time. I watched from the porch as she stood just beyond the no trespassing line, squinting up at the new signage. Her lips moved. Probably some withering insult she'd have whispered to a garden club 10 weeks ago. Then she noticed the camera. She looked straight into it, and I waved. She didn't wave back. She got in her car and left. I haven't seen her since. But that doesn't mean she's gone. The retreat fallout still trickled through the HOA. Turns out Karen had been booking community events through her niece's wedding planning business and pocketing the vendor. Fees, all under the table, all off HOA books. Once the investigation wrapped, she wasn't just out of her leadership role. She was fined by the county and barred from hosting events for 2 years on any shared HOA green space. Her little power empire, built on brunches and yoga retreats, crumbled under its own smug weight. I didn't gloat. Much. Instead, I put my land to better use. Where the arch once stood, I planted a fruit orchard, apples, peaches, and a line of thorny berry bushes right along the property edge. Where folding chairs had trampled wildflowers, I built a raised platform for my niece's fiddle band to play on Saturday nights. Friends and family gathered. No tickets, no flyers, no HOA invitations. Just ranchers and old souls sitting under the stars. The place felt like mine again. Like peace. And the gate? It stayed locked. People ask me if I regret not just letting it go. It was one afternoon, they say. Just a party. But it wasn't. It was a boundary, crossed without respect, apology, or accountability. Karen thought because she wore a name tag and held a title, she could rewrite reality. That rules bent around her, that she could take without asking and shrug off the consequences. She learned differently. Out here, respect isn't printed on HOA letterhead. It's earned, acre by acre, word by word. And I'll be damned if anyone, especially a silk-bloused tyrant in designer heels, stomps across what my family built just to serve mimosas and self-importance. So, no, I don't regret locking the gate. I regret not bolting it sooner.